Hi, you're on the Reddit Confessions channel. Today's story is one you won't forget. Buckle up. I know he means well, but I wish he'd just stop. That's the sentence that tore through me like a quiet storm. No raised voices, no slamming doors, no affair caught red-handed. Just that one sentence, whispered with a soft laugh, floating through the thin bathroom wall at her friend's dinner party. We weren't even arguing. We weren't in some relationship crisis. Number. We were exactly where I thought normal couples were supposed to be, smiling in public, politely drifting in private. She was 2 rooms away, glass of wine in hand, telling her friend Danica how exhausting it was to be loved by someone like me. "He hugs me like I'm made of glass," she said, "like I'll break if he lets go. It's sweet, but it's too much. Sometimes I hate it." I didn't hear Danica's reply. I didn't need to. I was standing in the hallway holding her coat. She'd asked me to grab it from the closet because she was cold. I guess the joke was on me. There I was, still the guy fetching her coat while she told someone else how deeply she disliked the way I loved her. I didn't interrupt. I didn't announce myself. I didn't even move. I just stood there, blinking like I was trying to reset my own reality. I wish I could say I got angry, that I confronted her then and there, that I left the party and never looked back. But I didn't. I waited until she came back, smiling, her hands outstretched toward the coat I held like a doorman. She kissed me on the cheek and said, "You're always taking care of me." I smiled like a fool. That night, I lay next to her in bed, staring at the ceiling while she slept soundly beside me. The next morning, I started packing. Not my bags, but my mind, my routine, my calendar. I started building a silent exit, brick by brick. I didn't want revenge. I wanted peace. But before I left, I needed to understand. Had she always felt this way? Was I the only one still pretending? And what else had she said when she thought I wasn't listening? The strange part is how normal everything stayed after that night. You'd expect a crack in the foundation to shake the whole house, right? But our routine kept moving forward, like nothing had shifted. Tessa still reminded me to buy oat milk, still texted me little memes during the workday, still called me L, like she always had. And I kept playing along. Maybe I was in shock. Maybe I just needed to hold on to the illusion a bit longer before it crumbled completely. But something inside me had changed. I stopped hugging her. Not coldly, not out of spite, but gently, like retreating from a shoreline I had once worshipped. I noticed how she didn't mention it, didn't ask why, didn't lean in to fill the space I was slowly leaving behind. That silence told me more than any confrontation could. The following weekend, we went to her colleague's birthday party, a rooftop kind of thing with too many people I didn't know and music too loud to think. Tessa looked beautiful. She always did. But when she introduced me to her coworkers, her voice had a different tone, like I was her +1 and not her partner of 9 years. I stood beside her while she talked shop with a man named Harper. He was tall, confident, the kind of guy who laughs with his whole chest and doesn't look over his shoulder to see if you're still there. She leaned in closer to hear him, laughed in a way I hadn't heard in months. I watched her touch his arm when he made a joke, just lightly, like it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. Not to me. The walk back to our car was quiet. She scrolled through her phone, smiling at something. Probably Instagram stories. I drove with both hands on the wheel, heart thudding in my ears. I wanted to say something, ask something, anything. But I was afraid of the answers. When we got home, she went straight to bed, said she was tired, that her heels were killing her. I stayed up, sitting on the couch in the dark with just the glow of the streetlights through the blinds. That's when I opened her laptop. I never do that. We always respected each other's privacy. At least, I thought we did. But something told me, maybe it was instinct, maybe it was desperation, that there was more to this story than one overheard comment. And I was right. In her email, buried under a folder labeled Drafts, I found messages, dozens of them, unsent, like little confessions she never had the courage to send. All to Harper. Some were simple, flirty. "Wish you were here today. You always make Mondays bearable." Others were deeper, more dangerous. "Sometimes I think about what it would have been like if I met you first." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even feel angry. I felt erased. This wasn't a sudden betrayal. It was a slow fade, stretched out over months, maybe years. And the worst part was realizing I had never noticed. because I'd been too busy loving her to see she'd stopped loving me back a long time ago. So I closed the laptop, stood up, and for the first time in my adult life, I started planning an exit not out of fear or sadness, but from the quiet, aching clarity that I no longer belonged here. The morning after I read her unsent emails, I woke up before her and stared at the ceiling, my body motionless under the sheets. I could hear her soft breathing, her hand occasionally brushing against mine in her sleep, as if the previous night hadn't happened, at least not for her. But for me, everything was different now. The air felt heavier, the bedroom smaller, the sheets colder, even with her right there next to me. I kept asking myself what kind of person writes intimate messages to another man and never sends them. Is that better or worse than sending them? Is it betrayal if it's only in drafts? Or is it even more insidious because it means she's rehearsing for something she still plans to do? That morning, I made coffee like usual. Same mug, same creamer, same routine, but my hands were shaking. She walked into the kitchen in her robe, kissed my shoulder, and said, "Thanks, babe." I couldn't even look at her. Not because I hated her. I didn't. That was the worst part. I still loved her. But now I knew that love was a one-way current, pulling me deeper while she stood dry on the shore. I started testing things, little things, just to see if she'd notice. I stopped leaving notes in her lunch bag. She never mentioned it. I stopped checking in when she stayed late at work. She never noticed. I stopped hugging her entirely, not even a hand on her back when we passed each other in the hallway. And still, nothing. That weekend, I told her I was going to visit my brother upstate. I needed space, I said. Just a couple of days to clear my head. She barely looked up from her phone. "Sure, drive safe," she said, and went back to scrolling. I didn't go to my brother's. I rented a cheap motel 2 towns over and sat with my own silence. I brought a notepad with me. I'm not a writer, but I started jotting down everything I had ignored in our marriage. Every red flag I brushed off. Every moment I told myself she was just going through something, when really she was going through me. There was the time she spent Christmas Eve at her company's emergency fundraiser dinner, but I found out later it wasn't a fundraiser. It was a private dinner party hosted by Harper. Then there was the time she forgot my birthday completely and blamed her burnout. Yet 2 days later, I saw a new spa charge on our shared card. And then there were the little things. She hadn't touched her wedding ring in weeks, not even when we were around other couples. She hadn't said, "I love you," in a tone that sounded like she meant it since spring. She hadn't looked at me, really looked in nearly a year. On the last night at the motel, I stared into the mirror and didn't recognize the man looking back. He had sunken eyes, a curved back, and the exhausted posture of someone who had been trying too hard for too long. That's when I knew this wasn't just about her. It was about me too, about what I had let slide, what I had tolerated, what I had enabled with my silence and desperate optimism. I wasn't just walking away from Tessa. I was walking away from the version of me that thought being nice enough was a reason for someone to stay. I returned home the next morning. She was still in bed, still unaware. I kissed her forehead and told her I'd missed her. She smiled, eyes closed, and whispered, "Love you." But the words didn't reach me, because now I knew they didn't mean the same thing to her. They hadn't for a long time. I didn't walk out the next day. I could have. Everything inside me was urging me to go, to take my keys, leave my ring on the counter, and vanish from her life like a shadow that had overstayed its welcome. But I didn't. Not because I was weak, not because I still had hope. I stayed because I wanted to see it for myself, how far gone we really were. I didn't trust my memories anymore. I needed proof that I wasn't just being dramatic, that this marriage wasn't salvageable, that I wasn't crazy for feeling like I didn't exist in my own home. Over the next week, I became an observer in my own relationship. Tessa didn't notice. I changed the way I spoke to her. Less warm, less curious, no more, "How was your day?" She didn't flinch. I cooked dinner 3 nights in a row and left hers on the stove, untouched, just to see if she'd even ask where I was during mealtime. She didn't. She sat on the couch with her noise-canceling headphones, watching makeup tutorials or chatting with coworkers in some Slack channel that always seemed more important than whatever I had to say. Her laughter, when it came, was no longer mine to enjoy. It was reserved for someone else. Then one evening, I got the confirmation I didn't even know I was searching for. We were both home, eating separately again. She was in the bedroom, curled up with her laptop, while I sat alone at the kitchen table. I was scrolling through our shared Google Drive, looking for an old tax file, and I saw a folder I hadn't noticed before, titled Rebrand. Out of curiosity, I opened it. It wasn't work-related, it was personal. Inside were photos, some edited, some raw. Tessa in new clothes I'd never seen her wear, with captions she had drafted for what looked like a secret social media profile. The poses were confident, seductive, nothing vulgar, but nothing like the woman I shared a bed with. There were notes too, lines like, "Start fresh," "New city," and "What do I actually want?" She had made a list titled, "Life Without L." I don't remember much of what was written because my eyes locked on one specific bullet point: stop pretending. I didn't make a sound, just closed the folder and leaned back in my chair. It was all there, spelled out for me. She wasn't planning to fix us. She was planning to outgrow me. She wasn't cheating, at least not physically, but she was already living in a world where I didn't exist. Emotionally, mentally, she had checked out months ago, maybe years. The problem wasn't that she hated when I hugged her. The problem was that she hated needing to pretend she liked it. That night, I watched her from the hallway as she FaceTimed someone, not Harper this time, someone else. She was wearing the blouse from the photos, one I'd never seen in person, and she was twirling her hair while laughing, lips painted in a shade she never wore around me. I didn't recognize her voice. I didn't recognize her at all. So I did what I'd been too afraid to do. I didn't pack a suitcase. That would have made it real too soon. Instead, I started slowly transferring my life out of the house piece by piece, like a ghost trying to erase its own existence. I backed up my files onto a flash drive and deleted my login from the shared computer. I started bringing home fewer groceries, canceled my monthly wine subscription she never touched, and stopped refilling the espresso beans she used every morning. Little things. Things she'd eventually notice, but not right away. I wanted her to feel the absence without knowing what had gone missing. I wanted her to live in the hollow space she'd carved without realizing it was already closing in on her. The following Friday, she came home late again. No explanation, no apology. Just walked in, kicked off her heels, and said she was too exhausted to talk. I nodded and said nothing, which seemed to please her. That's the thing about people who secretly want to leave you. They're most comfortable when you don't speak. Silence lets them pretend they're not being cruel. It gives them room to justify the slow fade, to believe the blame lies somewhere else, anywhere else but in their hands. But I was done being silent, not with her, not yet, but with myself. The next morning, I drove 2 hours out of town to a storage facility and rented a small unit under a new email address. I told the manager I was storing old art supplies, but it would eventually hold the final pieces of a life I was peeling away from hers. I also opened a private bank account at a different branch, completely separate from the one we shared. I transferred small amounts every few days, always under the radar. I was careful, meticulous, but not because I wanted revenge. I just wanted to leave clean, without begging, without explaining, without asking for permission. She didn't notice any of it. In fact, she seemed happier than usual that week. She started humming around the house again, painted her nails, wore a new perfume I didn't recognize. When I asked her about it, just to test her reaction, she shrugged and said she found it online. But I knew. I'd seen it listed in one of those draft emails to Harper. If I ever wore this around Elle, he'd probably think it was too loud. You like it? That moment stung more than I expected. I wasn't just being replaced, I was being rewritten. But the final push came on a Tuesday night. She was in the shower, her phone lighting up on the kitchen counter. I didn't plan to touch it. I wasn't snooping. But when the name popped up, Harper, I froze. The message was short, no more than 8 words. So, when do I get to see you alone? I didn't open it. I didn't need to. The water kept running upstairs while I stood there in the dark, phone buzzing on the counter, heart pounding in my chest like a warning bell that wouldn't stop. That's when the final thread snapped. There wasn't going to be a confrontation. No shouting, no teary showdown, no final why. Because there was no point asking for closure from someone who had already closed the door in their heart. Instead, I picked up my keys, drove to the storage unit, and began moving my belongings, my guitar, my childhood photo albums, the jacket my dad gave me before he passed, into the boxy concrete space that would serve as my purgatory before freedom. There's a strange kind of clarity that comes when you're standing on the edge of everything you thought you needed. It doesn't come in one loud crash. It arrives quietly, like fog lifting just enough to see how lost you really were. I began to notice things I had once explained away as coincidence. The sudden need for privacy. The way she angled her phone screen when she texted. The 2-hour gym visits that didn't show on her body, but seemed to give her an emotional glow. Tessa had been drifting for months, maybe even years. I had just chosen to row harder, instead of realizing we weren't even in the same boat anymore. I was meticulous in my plan to vanish. Every day after work, I took something small from the house. An old watch, a favorite book, one of the few photos where we actually looked happy, and stashed it in the storage unit. It became my ritual. I kept a duffel bag in the trunk of my car, slowly filling it with the pieces of a man she stopped seeing. I didn't know where I would go yet. I just knew I couldn't stay. And then came the dinner. Tessa surprised me with it. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, even a bottle of the wine we opened on our honeymoon. She lit candles, played music, wore the green dress I once said, made her look like a forest I could get lost in. It should have felt romantic, nostalgic, but all I felt was dread. Not because I didn't love her. I did, more than she probably ever knew. But because I finally understood that this was her guilt talking, not her heart. She didn't know I'd seen the message. She didn't know I'd already begun to disappear. She just sensed it, that shift in energy, that gap between our bodies she once resented but now seemed desperate to close. She kept pouring wine, smiling, asking questions she hadn't asked in months. "How was your day? Have you thought about taking that weekend trip again?" I nodded, played along, answered in fragments. I watched her, really watched her, and realized something quietly devastating. She was trying now only because she thought she might lose her safety net. Not me, just the version of me who always stayed no matter what. After dinner, she reached for my hand. I let her. It felt foreign, like touching a memory instead of a person. Her eyes searched mine for something, connection maybe, or forgiveness she hadn't earned. "I know I've been distant," she whispered. "I'm trying." "I really am." I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just gave her a small nod, stood up, and cleared the plates while she sat there, watching me like she was waiting for a sign. But I had no signs left to give. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my car, parked 2 streets over, staring at the house I used to call home. The windows were glowing with soft light. Somewhere inside, she was brushing her teeth, maybe scrolling her phone, maybe drafting another message to someone who wasn't me. And I thought about how strange it is to live with someone and still feel like a stranger in your own life. The next morning, she kissed me goodbye before work. I didn't return it. She didn't notice. So I made the final decision. I circled a date on the calendar, a random Friday 2 weeks out, and marked it with one word in my mind: gone. That would be the day I left. Not with a bang, not with a fight. Just with silence. The same silence she gave me for so long, now handed back to her like a mirror she couldn't avoid. I chose a Friday because she always worked late on Fridays. She claimed her team liked to wind down the week together, which, in her words, usually meant drinks, music, and too much small talk. I used to believe it. I used to picture her sitting around a table with tired coworkers, sipping wine and laughing at inside jokes I'd never understand. But now I knew better. I didn't know exactly where she was going, or with whom, but it wasn't just team drinks. Not anymore. That morning, she left like it was any other day. She kissed me on the cheek, told me not to wait up, and disappeared out the door in a cloud of perfume that didn't belong to me. I watched her leave from the window, standing behind the curtain like a ghost. As her car turned the corner, I moved fast. I'd rehearsed this in my head for weeks. There was no panic, no rush, just a strange, weightless calm. I opened the closet and took only what I needed. 3 changes of clothes, the old photo album she never touched, my passport, and a black notebook full of things I never had the courage to say out loud. I didn't bother with the rest. The bookshelves we built together, the espresso machine I bought her for Christmas, the frame wedding photo gathering dust on the hallway wall. It could all stay. I didn't want it. None of it felt like mine anymore. Before I left, I stood in the bedroom doorway for a long time, just staring. The bed was still unmade, her robe hung on the back of the chair, her makeup bag was open on the dresser, brushes still coated in the same blush she'd worn for the dinner 2 nights ago. Everything looked normal. Everything felt fake. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a letter, and placed it on her pillow. It wasn't dramatic, just 3 paragraphs, no accusations, no anger, just the truth, that I had loved her more than she ever realized, that I knew about the messages, the lies, the versions of herself she saved for other people, that I didn't hate her, I just couldn't keep shrinking myself to make her comfortable. At the bottom, I wrote, "Please don't look for me. Not because I'm hiding, but because I'm finally choosing myself." I left my ring beside it. I walked out the front door without looking back. By the time she got home, I was gone. Not just from the house, but from the city. I had booked a one-way train ticket to a quiet coastal town I hadn't visited since college. I didn't have a job lined up. I didn't have a plan. But I had my name, my breath, and, for the first time in years, my own silence. My phone buzzed constantly that night. Calls, texts, all from her. I didn't answer. Not out of cruelty, but because there was nothing left to say. I had said it all in the spaces where her love used to be, where my hugs were met with stiff arms and sighs, where my questions were answered with indifference, where the version of me she loved had died long ago, and I had been too naive to bury him. That night, I stood on the beach, barefoot, listening to the waves crash. I felt more grounded in that sand than I had in my marriage. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just stood there and breathed like someone learning how to do it for the first time. I stayed in that little coastal town far longer than I expected. At first, I rented a room above a bakery that smelled like cinnamon every morning. It wasn't glamorous, but it was enough. It was mine. I picked up work doing freelance design, something I hadn't touched since college, back when I used to draw just for the joy of it. Somewhere in the years of being the husband who fetched coats and cooked quiet dinners, I'd forgotten I had talents. A voice. A soul beyond being someone else's safety net. The days were slow, peaceful. I read more, ate less, slept better. I didn't check my phone often. Eventually, the texts stopped. I think she got the message. Maybe she cried. Maybe she got angry. Maybe she sent that email to Harper she had drafted 100 times. I'll never know. That chapter closed the moment I stepped off the train. 3 months later, I got a call from a local gallery. They'd seen some of my sketches online and wanted to feature a few. I didn't tell them where I came from or why I had started sketching again. I just smiled and said, I'd be honored. The night of the showing, a woman named Elise came up to me. She said my work looked like it came from a place of heartbreak and healing. I told her she wasn't wrong. We talked for hours that night, not about pain or betrayal, but about life, article, wonder. Her favorite color was storm cloud gray, she said, because it reminded her that even the darkest days can lead to rain that nourishes. I hadn't smiled that hard in years. No, this isn't a love story, not yet. But it is a story about choosing yourself, about realizing that staying small for someone else's comfort is no way to live, that sometimes walking away quietly is louder than any confrontation, and that even after the deepest heartbreak, there's still space to rebuild. Not the life you lost, but the one you were meant to create. Tessa never reached out again, not directly. I heard from a mutual friend that she was shocked, that she didn't understand why I left so suddenly. I suppose it's easier to notice someone's presence after they've already disappeared, but I don't hate her. I never will. She taught me something I might have never learned otherwise, that love without respect is just dependence dressed in warm clothing. So now, I wake up to ocean air. I sketch in the mornings. I take walks with no destination. I no longer shrink myself to be loved. And when someone hugs me, I don't feel trapped. I feel free. Have you ever walked away from something, or someone, that you once thought you could never live without? Tell us your story in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video if it spoke to you in any way. You've been watching Reddit Confessions. Until next time, take care of your heart. It's the only home that truly moves with you.